This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 322 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. So given this is Thanksgiving week, I wanted to just say at the top that there won't be a mailbag episode this week, but the matchup show is still going to get done, and it should be out late Wednesday afternoon, which means you'll get 2 Late Round Podcast episodes in one day. And since I'm on the topic, happy Thanksgiving. Now, before looking at this week's 10 trends, I wanted to let you guys know about a special Thanksgiving week offer from NumberFire. Whether you're betting on the Thanksgiving games, setting your DFS lineups, or just getting ready for the fantasy playoffs, NumberFire Premium covers everything. Normally as much as $49.99, you can try Premium today for just $5 when you sign up with promo code TOUCHDOWN. That's promo code TOUCHDOWN. Visit numberfire.com/premium for more details. Promo only applies for first-time users through the end of Cyber Monday. This first trend this week is all about Lamar Jackson's dominance. Right now, Baltimore quarterbacks are averaging 28.7 points per game. The opponents that they face this year have allowed an average of 18.5 points per game, and that includes the game that they played against Baltimore. That means that Lamar Jackson is outperforming that average by 10.2 points, and it's really a little bit more. To give you some context, Kansas City is in second place when it comes to looking at their points per game versus how many points per game their opponents have allowed. And Kansas City is outperforming their opponent's average by 4.9 points. Now, Patrick Mahomes' injury brought that down a little bit, but it's likely still about half of what Lamar Jackson is doing. It's going to be a fun offseason talking about where to draft Lamar Jackson next year. So as you know, Jordan Howard hasn't played in each of the Eagles' last 2 games. Miles Sanders has taken on a bigger role as a result, handling about 64% of the team's running back rushes and 11% of the Eagles' targets. Before the injury, Sanders was averaging a running back rush share that was 30 percentage points lower, and his target share was about 2 percentage points lower. And then all the while, Sanders played 84% and 85% of the team's snaps without Jordan Howard. Those are by far the highest snap share marks of any Eagles running back this season. The thing is, Sanders hasn't been all that great in fantasy. He's averaged 9 PPR points per game in these 2 contests without Jordan Howard. But the Eagles also scored 19 total points in those 2 contests. It's kind of hard for any running back to produce in that kind of environment. The point is, if Howard continues to miss time, Sanders should be able to bounce back in a pretty big way. The peripherals are actually pretty awesome. Trend 3 has to do with Aaron Jones and the fact that the Packers just haven't been throwing him the football. He's been the RB45, the RB3, and then the RB48 over his last 3 games. But over his last 2, he's only seen 1 target. Across his first 9 games, he was averaging over 5 targets per game. That was good for almost a 15% target share. And on Sunday, Jamal Williams saw a 22% target share. That was good for 8 targets. So the Packers are still technically throwing to running backs, but Jamal Williams has benefited from it, not Aaron Jones. The thing is, Williams hasn't run a ton more routes than Aaron Jones has over this time, according to Pro Football Focus. So I do expect Aaron Jones to see an uptick in target share moving forward. Jared Cook has now essentially played 4 games with Drew Brees this season. He's seen at least a 21% target share in half of those games played, including 2 of his last 3. And speaking of his last 3 games, which are the 3 that he's played since returning from injury, he's ranked as a tight end 8, 11, and 3 in weekly scoring during those contests. Jared Cook's actually been a top 12 tight end 1 in 5 straight games played. I'm going to be a total dad right now, but you could say that Jared is cooking. The next 3 trends are all related to the Rams, but I think they're all important and interesting to bring up, so I'm rolling with it. This one is that Jared Goff hasn't thrown a touchdown pass since the second quarter of a game against Cincinnati that was played all the way back in Week 8. And actually, since that game was played outside the country, he hasn't thrown a touchdown in the United States since Week 7. You guys might remember me talking about his 2-game stretch against Atlanta and Cincinnati on a 15 transaction show earlier this year, and then after those 2 games were up, he was a drop candidate. And it's because he's faced Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Baltimore in each of his last 3 games. Even still, regardless of matchup, not throwing a touchdown pass in those 3 games is pretty horrific. The next Rams trend, which is trend 6, is that during this brutal 3-game stretch, Cooper Kupp has been the wide receiver 88, the wide receiver 45, and the wide receiver 39 in weekly wide receiver scoring. He's averaged just 5.9 points per game during this time. From weeks 1 through 8, he was averaging 20.9 points per game. Now, this obviously has a lot to do with the offense playing so poorly, but Kupp's also seen his target share drop by about 10% in this split. Fortunately, a matchup against Arizona this week should help. And the last Rams trend is that Todd Gurley played 96% of LA's snaps on Monday night. That was the highest mark of any Rams running back all year. Gurley's actually hit a rate above 76% just one other time. I think we're looking at a situation with the Rams where they're desperate for wins in order to stay competitive and luck into a playoff spot, so they're utilizing Gurley at a slightly higher rate. The problem is what I talked about on last week's mailbag show. They're still not using Gurley enough as a receiver. He had just an 8% target share against the Ravens, and the Rams still have by far the lowest running back target share in the league this year. So his fantasy production isn't that surprising. When you get a running back in an offense that's not producing, and then that offense isn't using that running back as a pass catcher, poor performances happen. All right, we're done talking about the Rams and we're on to trend 8. Anthony Miller has seen 23% of Chicago's targets over the last 2 weeks. He played a lot of snaps in week 11 against the Rams, but his snap share actually dropped to just 55% against the Giants this past week. That's not the best trend, but the usage is. And now Taylor Gabriel has a concussion. I may or may not talk about Anthony Miller on the matchup show this week. DeAndre Hopkins saw Will Fuller back in the lineup this past week, and he also saw a decrease in target share. From weeks 1 through 7, with Will Fuller in that Texans lineup, Hopkins averaged a 29% target share per game. Then from weeks 8 through 11, so 3 games, that target share jumped to almost 38%. And then in week 12, with Will Fuller back, we saw it at 28.6%, so it fell again. Now, obviously, Hopkins still produced, and he still will produce, though a matchup against New England is going to be tough this week. But Fuller has made an impact on DeAndre Hopkins' target share this year. The last trend is that Russell Wilson has now finished outside QB1 territory in 4 of his last 5 games. He's been QB 18, 17, 14, and 19 in those 4 contests. There have been some tough matchups against San Francisco and Baltimore in that stretch, but he also underperformed against Atlanta and Philadelphia from a fantasy perspective. You're still likely plugging and playing Russell Wilson, but things are trending in the wrong direction for fantasy purposes. That's going to do it for today's show. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. Like I said at the top, I'll have the matchup show out later today. So I'll talk to you then.